Good morning. My name is María Elisa Díaz de la Garza, and this morning I'm going to talk to you about using games in Tesol for blind and low vision learners. My colleagues, Dr. María de Lourdes Gutierrez Aceves and Licenciada Paulina Alejandra Díaz Ruíz also helped with this presentation. So let's get started. I'm going to begin with this famous quote by one of the most famous American authors, political activists, and lecturers who was the first deafblind person to earn a Bachelor in Arts degree. Her name is Helen Keller. The best and most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or even touched. They must be felt with the heart. Our agenda for today is an introduction. I'm going to talk about the project Tesol, Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages for Visually Impaired Learners in Chiapas, and conclusions and implications for the future. In Mexico, we know that a great number of teachers are not prepared to meet the needs of students with disabilities, and they face a great number of challenges as they seek to do the best for their learners, often in very difficult circumstances, such as the case of resource-poor environments, which is the situation we have at the University of Chiapas. Most of our students in this program are very have low resources. These include dealing with a lack of adequate resources and specialized teacher preparation. Worldwide, the World Health Organization estimates that there are at least 1.3 billion visually impaired people in the world. In Mexico, more than 2 million people are visually impaired, of which 415,000 are declared blind. We know that this number is underreported because of the stigma associated with a disability. There are probably many more. Therefore, 6% of the Mexican population is disabled, according to the INEGI. However, despite Mexico's commitment to ensure inclusive education for all, a great number of learners are marginalized and experience barriers to learning. This has got to stop. What are some of the barriers? We have social and cultural barriers that include economic barriers, discrimination, and ignorance. Many people are not aware of all the possibilities, so they often limit what a person who is visually impaired might be able to do. Also, our policies have to change. Class size matters greatly. Assessment and the budget allocated to these programs. In addition, accessibility is a great barrier. We need to improve our infrastructure, and the number of support staff in schools, the materials available, and the technology, so that all students may shine and reach their full potential. However, we acknowledge that in Mexico, there's a great lack of training and didactic resources for teaching learners with visual impairments. So in 2018, I decided to open this project at the local cultural center. It's the Jaime Sabines Sala Rail Cultural Center in Chiapas. And we were able to give 5 face-to-face semesters of this project. However, unfortunately, because of COVID, we had to stop this project. And at the moment, the students are learning by WhatsApp, the ones that can afford it. They connect with their teacher, and it is all listening and speaking because of the distance. So how can we help children who are visually impaired to learn a language? In the case of the service learner who worked on this project, which is my colleague Paulina, she worked with children with games, with multisensory resources, with songs, tasks where learners wouldn't be bored and which seemed more significant and motivating. More than anything, she focused on vocabulary to help students to learn how to communicate effectively in the target language. It was also necessary that she learn Braille to develop literacy skills for the students, so that in the face-to-face portion of the project, she could give the materials that had the names to foster literacy skills. Here are some examples of the games that Paulina was able to do with the students. She's playing a modified version of Twister that's tactile. For the students that are low vision, we covered their eyes with a blindfold so that they would have the the same options as students who were totally blind. In the middle, you can see a picture of a girl playing Scrabble. And in the other pictures, you see the children playing with different types of games to develop their vocabulary in the target language. Now, what were some of the issues in this project? The lack of information and didactic resources, teaching programs which lack inclusive components. In Mexico, most programs are designed on a one-size-fits-all. There's inappropriate pedagogy which does not foster social participation and often leads to exclusion. We found that with the use of games, students became much more social, and this helped us quite a bit during the project. So as I mentioned before, there's a great stigma which can cause social exclusion. Many people are not familiar with individuals who are visually impaired, so they tend to avoid them. They feel uncomfortable with them. So we need to develop our strategies and resources to provide more opportunities, and this will help us address poverty and ignorance. On average, most people who are visually impaired have lower opportunities for employment and for academic success. So what were the research questions for this project? How successful are didactic games in Tesol for blind and low vision learners? Are modified games useful for developing speaking skills in Tesol for 10 to 15-year-old learners with visual impairment? And how do ludic didactic strategies aid in fostering social participation in blind and low vision learners aged 10 to 15 in Tesol? So some of the factors that were very important to address were mobility. The lack of vision makes it more difficult to collect, process, and store information regarding time and space. Many times these students had never been able to play many games because they were blind, they were excluded from them at home and in school. According to Garza in the ONCE, which is a Spanish organization that has done great work with the blind, there's a lack of confidence. Movements are hampered. Notions of time and space are affected. There's a lack of curiosity. There's more self-protection because since they cannot see, they tend to have more accidents and get hurt. Incorrect posture, they tend to bend their head forward. They need help in adjusting their head so that they can have a correct posture. Developmental delays and less physical activities. In the aspect of personality and social development, there is a lack of social skills, less social interaction, passivity. They become more dependent. They're not independent. We have to develop their independence. Low self-esteem and difficulty communicating feelings. For support, they require a great deal of stimulation, suitable resources in Braille to develop their literacy skills, multisensory resources that use their other senses so that they can obtain the information, and for mobility, the use of canes so that they can safely move around. Games in the classroom provide opportunities for authentic communication, positive atmospheres. They're flexible and they're very motivating. We can adapt or create our own games, which will help us to develop, to foster development. According to the ONCE, games will help us to learn to use other senses, to socialize, to develop motor skills, to develop independence, and to learn to recognize materials and objects. So they're a great way to make the class fun and dynamic. Some of the games played during phases 1 and some of the limitations during phases 2 of this project were that we began in 2019, and when we wanted to collect some of the data, COVID had hit our state. So we had to conduct some of the interviews through WhatsApp, because they were not able to go to the Braille Center. However, we did have the opportunity to play Is the Wolf There?, musical chairs, Twister, and Scrabble with the students. However, there was a lack of suitable services and didactic materials, a lack of participants. We had few students arriving at the classes, and because of the COVID epidemic, we were interrupted. The methodology, there were 2 boys and 2 girls who were both blind or had low vision. In each group, there was one child who was totally blind and one child who had low vision. And they were all ages 10 to 15 in the Jaime Sabines Braille Center of Tuxtla Gutierrez. Data collection was through a teacher's log in the spring of 2019, through interviews conducted by WhatsApp, and through a focus group conducted by WhatsApp. The level for the students was A2 according to the European framework. To address the questions that we asked, how effective is using motor didactic games in Tesol for low vision and blind learners? It makes learning more meaningful. Games make the class more interesting and fun. Students like learning through play. It helps them to retain information, and it motivates them to participate more actively. How can the use of games enhance the development of speaking skills in TESOL for the visually impaired? The project provided an opportunity to interact and practice vocabulary in L2, and our findings resulted in a didactic proposal of how to use games and how games can be created or adapted to enhance learning. For question 3, how can the use of didactic games foster social participation in low vision and blind learners? Games created a great atmosphere and the development of different skills. Playing in groups fostered social participation and developed motor skills and self-confidence. In the beginning, they were a bit afraid of playing Wolf, Are You There? But the more we played it, the more confident they became, and they noticed that they didn't have so many mobility issues. What are some of the strategies we recommend? Facing the class when speaking clearly at a normal volume, identifying yourself before each interaction, verbally indicating when you initiate and end an interaction, providing reading tasks in advance so that the individuals may have time to convert them into Braille or audio versions, allowing students to record lessons if they have a phone, verbally explain what is written in the blackboard or in images, diagrams, or charts, seat the learner to her best advantage according to her preference, which is usually closer to the teacher at the head of the classroom, eliminate background noises as much as possible, adjust lighting for photosensitive learners, employ alternative assessment, and provide additional time to complete tasks. Normally, visually impaired learners will require a little bit more time to process information. So if for a normal visual learner, you're going to ask for 5 tasks, for the student that has visual impairment, ask for 3. Okay, reflective conclusion. This project has provided us with an opportunity to help break down barriers and develop positive attitudes towards teaching visually impaired learners. With every step the teacher takes to improve her praxis, she becomes a change agent, always committed to doing her best to improve the well-being of every student. What were some of the actions? To explore, to adapt, and to diversify. We found that taking everyday games, we could adapt them. For example, there is a Braille version of UNO, which is a bit expensive. I found it on Amazon the other day here in Mexico for 500 pesos. In the United States, it costs $10 in Target. However, if need be, for 100 pesos, we can get the game in a normal version, and all we do is we modify it, we put it in Braille, we label it in Braille. Recommendations. It's necessary to become informed. You need to consult the literature. You need to consult experts. You need to ask the students and their parents how they like being taught, what activities they prefer, what suits them. Each student is individual and unique, so they will have unique needs depending on their exact situation. It's also necessary to learn, consult the literature quite a bit, read, consult Facebook. We found many Facebook groups with a lot of information. At the moment, for this project, we are creating video tutorials on how to create didactic resources for visually impaired students. They are free. They are on YouTube. Look for Conchita Hernandez, and you will have access to all of the lovely resources that the service learners who are involved in this project have been able to create. So one of the most important factors is to develop your creativity. Take any game that you would use with any group, adapt it, create something new from it, and don't overprotect the learners. That was an issue that many of the students have had when they've worked with them. They tend to overprotect them because they are blind. Don't overprotect them. Our function as teachers is to develop their independence so that they can become independent learners and foster their independence in the future. Also, share what you have learned through any projects where you are working with students with a barrier to learning and social participation. This will help quite a bit. So what are the implications and the conclusions about this project? Well, first of all, we know that more than 60% of Mexicans have no access to special services for the blind. This needs to change. We need to provide more opportunities for all types of learners, learners who are blind, who are deaf, who have autism, any barrier to learning or social participation. Everyone has a right to an education. The lack of resources in disadvantaged contexts implies that teachers have to develop coping strategies to deal with the challenges that they face. However, you can take any game. A coping strategy would be to use your creativity. If you don't have access to the Braille version of Twister, you can just make your own. You can have it printed. In one of the shops, there are so many all over Mexico, where for 100 pesos they can print out the board for you, and then you can put your textures for yourself. For each color, you put a different texture, and you can glue these on so that the students will be able to play the Braille version of Twister. Also have blindfolds. You can buy a blindfold anywhere. You buy a payacate in a fabric store, and these are very economical. We've bought them for 10 pesos a piece here in Tuxtla, Gutierrez. Currently, teacher education programs in Mexico operate on a one-size-fits-all approach, which does not take into consideration the differences between students. It's necessary for us to consider this, to see a learner's wants and needs, to help them to shine. Implications: provide more opportunities to work with all types of learners to help address barriers. This is especially important in initial teacher education. When students are learning to become teachers, they should be provided with opportunities to work with anyone in our community that requires with extra support. This means to find ways for them to work with blind students, with deaf students with other situations. And we can also use modified versions of games to help them. So there are no limits. Thank you very much for this. And here are our references. Thank you very much. On behalf of my colleagues, María de Lourdes Gutierrez Aceves and Paulina Díaz Ruíz, I, Ana María Elisa Díaz de la Garza, thank you. And I look forward to answering your questions in the discussion portion of the FEL 2021. Thank you very much. Have a lovely day.